New video this morning shows the moment of impact when that massive mother of all bombs exploded in Afghanistan, the most powerful non-nuclear bomb in the U.S. arsenal. The target, ISIS terrorists and their underground tunnel system. But was it also something more? Something like a 21,000-pound message to the world from President Trump. This comes just after several other major military actions taken by the United States. The president ordering missile strikes against Syria's military, dispatching a Navy strike group to the Korean Peninsula, and also sending dozens of troops to Somalia. First, let's get the very latest from CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh. He is in Iraq on all of this. So, Nick, you've been to this part of Afghanistan where this bomb hit. What more are you learning about the target, the casualties, and the fallout now?
The casualties so far, according to the initial count, Kate, aren't that many. 36 dead ISIS militants for a $16 million device. I mean, that's nearly $500,000 per dead terrorist. We're also hearing that 3 tunnels were taken out as well. I think the key part of the message here, though, was that the United States is willing to use all force at its disposal to tackle ISIS in Afghanistan, where this bomb hit, a remote mountainous region, very hard to insert troops there and effectively fight without getting a lot of casualties. And this is also the epicenter of ISIS, frankly, in Afghanistan too. Now, we've heard from the US commander there that this was the right weapon for the right target. Are those his words? He calls ISIS animals and reminds people, frankly, that they were recently involved in an attack in Kabul, the capital, where they slaughtered doctors and patients and in a military hospital there. That's just across from the American embassy. They've been really on the resurgence, ISIS, after getting a setback when the Afghan army swooped into action over a year ago now. They've been on their front foot, gaining recruits. Their brand of ideology, sick as it is, attractive to many young fighters who are disillusioned with the Taliban insurgency. This also comes at a very key time for Afghanistan. The war there is going very badly indeed. At least half of the country is under Taliban control or contested by the Taliban, and the US have a minimal presence there that's trying to do all it possibly can to keep the government together. But Afghan security forces and military are receiving record casualties right now. They're losing their grip on the country, and it's just going to get worse this year. Kate?
And here's one other element about this bomb when it went off yesterday, Nick. It's that a lot of folks, especially in the United States, when they think of ISIS and where the United States is going after ISIS, it's not in Afghanistan. All of the focus is in Iraq and Syria.
Absolutely, and I think many people in the US have tried to forget Afghanistan. You know, it is the United States' longest war. It was something Barack Obama tried to tackle with a passion, but his surge fell apart, frankly, because of changes in leadership in the military there, and ISIS have stepped into that chaos. You know, the messaging from the US has always been how well the war was going, so they could let Afghan security forces take over the job and pull out themselves. Well, they just didn't do a particularly good job. They've lost a lot of people fighting very bravely, but they haven't managed to hold key towns. You know, off the radar much of the time. We're seeing key places that Americans have fought for going back into the hands of the Taliban, cities at times briefly falling to the Taliban. You know, this is going very badly indeed, and it's that chaos. Remember bin Laden? What? He exploited the chaos of the Taliban presence there to hide out in the caves and launch 9/11. Well, ISIS have done a similar thing. They've seen a lot of collapse in certain parts of the country. They put that ideology in play there. They're even fighting the Taliban at times, and it's a real potential threat as a safe haven for them in the future, Kate.
And of course, the question remains, what will the United States and what will Afghan security forces do in the aftermath of this massive bomb and any gains that they see there? Great to see you, Nick. Thanks so much. So, big question here. Did President Trump personally greenlight the bombing mission we were just talking about? He was asked that very question very directly. Listen here to his answer.
Did you authorize it, sir?
Everybody knows exactly what happened. So, and what I do is I authorize my military. We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing.
Joining me now, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. He's a former Green Beret who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's also the author of Game Changers, Going Local to Defeat Violent Extremists. And also joining us is Derek Chollet. He's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs under President Obama. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Colonel, first to you. Why did it seem, in that soundbite that we just heard from the president yesterday, why did it seem that he had a bit of a hard time answering that question if he authorized the strike?
Yeah, I don't know exactly why. It did seem like there was a little bit of stammering there. But frankly, Kate, you know, the president has been approving, and the National Security Council have been approving at very high levels, strikes in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. So it does sound to me like President Trump is going to decentralize command and control and authorization for these strikes. But that's a big bomb. And I do think that probably the president did have some say in that thing being dropped. What concerns me, though, is that the fact that we're still talking about big bombs being dropped on Afghanistan 15 years after starting this war, it's an ineffective approach. It really is.
That's a really interesting perspective, Colonel. Derek, from your perspective, of course, we know that both Bush and Obama had access to this very same bomb. They didn't use it. Was it under consideration when you were there? Was this part of the conversation?
Absolutely it was. But I think what President Trump said yesterday is that he wasn't involved in the operational details of this mission. The Afghanistan commander said today that this was a tactical decision, which means it was a decision that he made. I think President Trump has ceded a lot of authority to the military, a lot of decision-making power to the military, and he's quite happy to take credit for that when things go well. The question to my mind is whether he will be willing to share accountability when things go wrong, as unfortunately in military affairs they often do.
And that is an interesting point, Colonel, because the president has said that General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, and others have wanted that decentralized approach. He's handed more authority over to the Pentagon in order to authorize strikes like this. That is a big change from Obama. But to Derek's point, if something goes wrong, who's then to blame?
Well, I think the president and all the commanders in Afghanistan all are, I think they're willing to accept responsibility for their actions. I mean, I haven't seen anything from President Trump yet that tells me otherwise, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Here's what I think, though. I do think that we need to continue to decentralize and push down authority and rules of engagement to our commanders on the ground, Kate. I mean, special forces have been operating in that area even since the drawdown has occurred. And frankly, their rules of engagement are far too constrictive, and we need to empower them more to do more in these rural areas, not drop more bombs.
Colonel, I think that's one thing that that's part of the debate, but one thing that might be lost on folks. Why is it, in your view, a good thing to kind of decentralize, to hand that authority down to folks on the ground, if you will, for lack of a better term? So where you might see sensible, some folks might see dangerous.
Well, see, we have this preferred Western way of warfare, Kate, which is to drop big bombs and put large troop formations on the ground. But Afghanistan, the area being exploited by ISIS and al-Qaeda, is an honor-based tribal culture. And getting out in those rural areas where 80% of the population live and the bad guys live requires advisors like Green Berets and others to get out there and stay out there over a prolonged period of time and work from the bottom up. I mean, that's what we're going to have to do. And dropping bombs on rural desert areas, I'm telling you, after 15 years, it's ineffective. And if that's where we are right now in this fight, I'm more concerned about that than anything else, because we haven't learned our lessons.
Derek, the president, when he was asked that if this bomb was to send a message, a broader message, a message to North Korea, and when he was asked that, he said, I don't know, and it doesn't make any difference. Do you agree?
Well, I don't think it was intended to send a message. As I said, I don't think the president was involved in the operational decision to deploy this kind of capability. And moreover, this is not the kind of capability the U.S. military would use against a target like North Korea, because it's not a bunker buster. This is not a weapon that burrows into the ground to try to take out.
I haven't asked you yet. Do you think the president should have had to sign off on something like this?
I don't think so, actually. I think this is a tactical decision that it is appropriate for the commanders in the field to have this sort of authority. The difference is I would like to see a president that is witting of these sorts of decisions. It means they may delegate the final authority to a commander in the field, but there's not much evidence to me to suggest that the president's actually focused at all on these kinds of operational details.
Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, thank you so much. Derek, it's great to meet you. Thanks for coming on.
Great, thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the world waits to see what North Korea's unpredictable dictator will do as concerns mount that Kim Jong-un will launch a nuclear test in the next 24 hours. I'm going to